We all have them. That dusty box in the attic, the forgotten trunk at the back of a wardrobe. They hold the faded photographs and forgotten trinkets of our family's past. We might look at them with a fond, passing smile, but for most of us, they are just sentimental objects. But what if one of those objects wasn't just a memory? What if it was a silent witness to one of the most infamous nights in human history? This was the reality for one family who stepped into the quiet, expectant atmosphere of the BBC's Antiques Roadshow. They brought with them not a grand piece of furniture or a sparkling jewel, but something far more humble and infinitely more powerful, a simple, time-worn letter. As expert Hilary Kay leaned in, the story that unfolded around this single piece of paper hushed the entire room, reminding us all that the most valuable treasures are not measured in pounds and pence, but in the heartbeats of survival. The letter belonged to a man named Sidney Daniels. In 1912, he was just a boy of 18, his life brimming with the kind of adventure only youth can promise. He had landed a job as a plate washer aboard the most magnificent vessel the world had ever seen, the RMS Titanic. For a young man, it must have felt like stepping into a dream. He was part of the maiden voyage of the unsinkable ship, a floating palace of technological marvel and sheer opulence. But that dream was destined to become a frozen, terrifying nightmare. His daughter, standing before the cameras decades later, began to recount the story passed down to her, her voice a conduit to the past. She spoke of that fateful Sunday night. Sidney was fast asleep, exhausted from his work, when the peace was shattered by a sudden, frantic banging on his cabin door. It was the night watchman, she recalled, the urgency of the moment still palpable in her telling. They were all a bit bleary-eyed because at first they thought it was a drill. Imagine that. The confusion, the groggy annoyance of being woken for what you believe is a routine exercise. But the cold, sharp air on the deck told a different story. The gentle list of the ship, the strange absence of the engine's thrum. Something was terribly wrong. As Sidney reached the deck, the scene was initially one of eerie calm. There were hardly any people about. Then the officers appeared, their faces grim, and a sense of dread began to creep in. Sidney, just a boy himself, was thrust into the role of a rescuer. He was ordered to go to the passenger cabins and wake people up. Here, in the face of impending doom, he encountered the strange, stubborn nature of human denial. Some, cocooned in the warmth of their beds in the ship's invincible reputation, were dismissive. One or two said, "What does this young man know? He's 18, the boat is unsinkable. We're not going up on deck," his daughter recounted. Others worried about the trivial in the face of the ultimate. "We've got children, they're going to get a chill if they go up on deck." Through it all, Sidney pleaded and ushered. Amidst the rising chaos and the orchestra playing bravely on, he performed small acts of profound humanity. He helped the children with the life jackets and ushered them up on deck, his relatives shared. A simple, compassionate gesture from a young man who was likely as terrified as anyone else. As expert Hilary Kay listened, her expression was one of deep empathy. "You can imagine the scene of chaos and despair," she murmured, "because people realized there weren't enough lifeboats." This was the terrifying reality Sidney now faced. His job, he understood, was to get as many people as possible into the few boats available. All the while, the icy black water of the Atlantic was climbing the decks, a relentless, freezing tide. When the last lifeboat was lowered into the darkness, the ship groaned its final laments. The water was no longer just a threat. It was swirling around his knees. The moment of decision had arrived. He thought, "It's time to go." His relative continued the harrowing tale. Sidney Daniels dived off the side of the Titanic. He plunged into water so cold it stole the breath from his lungs. With every ounce of his will, he swam away from the colossal, dying ship, instinctively knowing the suction from its final descent would be a death sentence. He found a lifebelt and a fellow survivor, but his instinct screamed they were still too close. "It's no good here, let's swim away," he urged his companion. And so they swam. In the vast, star-dusted darkness, surrounded by the cries of the lost, Sidney found a focal point. He said he saw a star in the sky, which he thought was his mother, and swam towards this star. His relative shared, a beautiful, heartbreaking detail. It was a beacon of love in an ocean of despair, a celestial hand guiding him forward. That star, real or imagined, led him to an overturned lifeboat, a small island of hope where a handful of men clung, shivering, between life